We have quorum. Accordingly, I call this meeting to order, acknowledging first of all that in Ottawa we meet on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on February 25th, 2021, the committee is continuing its study on the subject matter of Bill C-15, an act respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. Before I continue, I see Ms. Gill has her hand up.
Merci. Oui.
Thank you. I would like to, the members of the committee, I don't have access to the digital study for Bill C-15. I haven't been given access, so I would like to have the consent of the committee. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gill, and so let me put it to the committee that access to the binders typically would not be in order. However, we could, on unanimous consent of the committee, agree, notwithstanding the routine motion governing distribution of documents, that Ms. Gill and Ms. Gazan be granted access to the committee's digital binders for the duration of this study on the matter of Bill C-15. Do we have any objections? Is there anyone who objects on our committee to allowing the digital binder to be shared? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for unanimous consent to allow the binders to be shared by, just show me your hands, thumbs. So by unanimous consent, we agree to share the digital binders with Ms. Gill and Ms. Gazan, granting them access to the binders for the duration of the study and any study pursuant to the order of reference thereof. And thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Gill. And so, ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
To ensure an orderly meeting, participants may speak and listen in the official language of their choice. The issues with microphones is very important because we cannot properly conduct our meeting unless it is fully and clearly translated in our two official languages. So you may switch from speaking one language to another, no problem. Ensure your video is turned on while you're speaking. Please speak slowly and clearly. And when not speaking, have your mic on mute. And pursuant to the motion adopted on March 9th, 2021, I must inform the committee when witnesses have not completed technical pre-tests. Mr. Clerk, I understand that we're clear on that issue. Everyone has been pre-tested? Thank you. And so, moving on, members of the committee, with us today by video conference are the following witnesses. Dale Swampy, President of the National Coalition of Chiefs. Regional Chief Terry Teegee, representing the BC First Nations Leadership Council, accompanied by General Counsel Merle Alexander. Executive Chair Harold Calla and CEO Jordy Hungerford, representing the First Nations Financial Management Board. Thank you all for taking the time to appear. We open with 6-minute statements from each, followed by our questionings. And Chief President Swampy, please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Thank you for an opportunity to speak with you today as you study Bill C-15. I am presenting to you today from the traditional territory of the Tsuut'ina Nation near Calgary, Alberta, and the traditional territory of the Treaty 7 First Nations in southern Alberta. My name is Dale Swampy. I'm the president of the National Coalition of Chiefs, a coalition of industry-supportive chiefs. Our mandate is to defeat unreserved poverty on First Nation reserves. We work to establish mutually beneficial agreements between First Nations and industry partners in an effort to enhance the economic prosperity of reserve communities. I'm also a member of the Samson Cree Nation. I think UNDRIP is important and significant in many ways. and I obviously support Indigenous rights. But I am skeptical about Bill C-15 itself. I think it needs to be written much more carefully, because as drafted today, it is obvious to me that it will deter investment in Canadian resource development, and that hurts the Indigenous communities that rely on resources as much as it hurts anyone. Most of us want to attract investment to our territories. We want economic development and jobs and own source revenues. In fact, UNDRIP affirms that very right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of our lands, territories, and other resources. This right is meaningless if we can't attract financing or business partners to develop our resources because the law is unclear. I've spent my professional life in First Nations and the oil and gas industry, and know firsthand what happens when federal bureaucracy gets in the way of development. However well-intentioned C-15 is, my discussions with legal experts, industry representatives, and investment bankers have persuaded me it is introducing another layer of uncertainty and risk to development in Indigenous territories. That is because it adds the confusion about who has the authority to provide or deny consent on behalf of Indigenous people, be it chief and council, hereditary chiefs, or small groups of activists. It also implies that a single nation can deny consent, a veto in practice, if not in name, on projects that cross dozens of territories, be they pipelines, railroads, or electric transmission lines. I think the uncertainty in the legislation makes it likely that it will be used to delay resource development projects by groups that oppose extractive and other resource projects under any circumstances, even those where Indigenous nations are overwhelmingly in favor and have equity ownership. I've seen firsthand how environmental groups can push their own agendas and use Indigenous rights against our own interests. Federal governance structures have often worked to deter investment in Indigenous lands and territories and reduce our business competitiveness. C-15 has the potential to add one more barrier between Indigenous peoples and industry on top of the Indian Act and other legislation. The added uncertainty, hurdles, and risk to development on Indigenous territory makes it difficult for our nations and businesses to attract investment, and more expensive when they can, due to risk premiums. Undermining our own economy is not a recipe for prosperity and self-determination. The simple fact is that most of our communities need resource development in order to prosper. We need legislation. We don't need legislation that will make that harder. I want to touch on one last thing before I close, and that's on standards of consultation and consent. The federal government has imposed very high standards of consultation on industry, even to the point where projects that First Nations want to see happen can't attract investment because the process is too burdensome or expensive or unclear. But now with Bill C-15, I don't see you applying those standards to yourselves. COVID-19 is restricting the ability of our chiefs to travel to Ottawa to speak directly with representatives of Parliament and share our thoughts and concerns regarding the bill. Our leaders are busy dealing with public health issues. They need time to understand before legislation is passed how it will affect Indigenous peoples in practice, what it will mean to approval processes for projects in our territories, and how the proposed action will be developed, and how the proposed action plan will be developed. UNDRIP Article 19 specifically says you need the informed consent of First Nations and all Indigenous peoples before you pass legislation that affects them. I know you don't have that universal consent on C-15. I know many chiefs who are concerned and want, at the very least, some more time to engage and understand the implications of C-15 better and have input into how it's written. What is your understanding of how you need to obtain and demonstrate Indigenous people's consent to pass this legislation? Because how you define it to pass this bill, what do you think is a reasonable standard? Should not be different than how you expect industry to obtain consent on other projects. In fact, I would think you would hold yourselves to a higher standard, especially on this piece of legislation. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, President Swampy. And next, we have Regional Chief Terry Teegee representing the BC First Nations Leadership Council, accompanied by General Counsel Merle Alexander. Please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Masaicho, Deneza, Tsekuza, Skaiza. Members of Parliament, first of all, I want to acknowledge the territory that I'm on, the Lheidli T'enneh Dene people of the Dakas territory near Prince George, British Columbia. I want to also acknowledge the territories you are broadcasting from or attending this meeting from, that it is Indigenous lands and have always been Indigenous lands since time immemorial. First of all, I just want to thank you to the committee for the invitation to offer some remarks. I'm honored to speak on the topic of federal legislation to implement the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the declaration, if you will. This remarks a significant turning point in the history of this country and follows an historic occasion in the province of British Columbia. On November 28, 2019, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, or DRIPA as it is known, passed unanimously in the BC legislature with the support from all parties in British Columbia. DRIPA was widely supported by First Nations in British Columbia. It represents a sea change from the provincial government's tradition of denying and opposing our title, rights, and existence as distinct peoples, and acceptance of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission call to action number 43 to adopt and implement the declaration as the framework for reconciliation. This was a turning point in BC. While much hard work lies ahead, we are starting to see a shift toward the human rights-based approach required by the Declaration. As an example, last fall, the BC government commissioned a comprehensive review of anti-Indigenous racism in the provincial healthcare system, promoting Article 24 of the Declaration affirming Indigenous peoples' rights to access to healthcare without discrimination. Historic and recent events demonstrate the imperative for concrete measures to address racism in our society and the responsibility of the public governments to act. The United Nations Declaration is a global human rights instrument, and the human rights cannot be fully enjoyed where there is racism and discrimination. The anti-Indigenous racism and discrimination that continues today underscores the appropriateness of the human rights-based approach to reconciliation. Reconciliation cannot be based on denial of rights or racism. This is inherently contradictory and incompatible with upholding human rights. Bill C-15 with the improvements is an important next step in Canada's implementation of the Declaration. It is a long overdue pathway for change predicated on respect for human and inherent rights, and repudiation and eradication of racist and colonial constructs and doctrines that have no place in this country or our relationships. The preamble is important as it speaks to our collective history in Canada and the legacy of colonialism that has had tragic and profound impacts on First Nations across the country, underscoring the need for the United Nations Declaration to apply in Canada. The bill must be clear that Canada is repudiating the doctrines of advocating superiority, like the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius. All interpretations of Indigenous rights from an era based of colonial denial cannot continue. It must also be clear that implementation of the United Nations Declaration is a responsibility of all in government to take actions and ensure consistency of laws as required under Section 5. Further, it is imperative that the cooperation and consultation carried out under the bill reflects the constitutional relationship between the Crown, Indigenous peoples, and key standards of the Declaration, such as free, prior, and informed consent, The bill must clarify and specify mechanisms and a plan needed for achieving consistency of laws. The new pathway will see laws of Canada shift to be more inclusive and respectful of the rights and our unique relationship, and new actions and approaches of partnership and participation. Bill C-15 will complement the BC Declaration Act and contribute to the strengthened foundation of Crown Indigenous relations and reconciliation in BC, where treaties were not concluded throughout the province and the land question remains largely outstanding, as does the implementation of pre-Confederation Douglas treaties. The implementation of the declaration through laws and action by both Canada and the province of BC will be a strong foundation for innovation and principled negotiations, improving and expediting the negotiation and conclusion of robust, enduring human rights-based treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements in British Columbia. The work of upholding and protecting Indigenous human rights is urgent, particularly during a global health pandemic where human rights are vulnerable and ordinarily impacted. The urgent need to respect and promote the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples is stated in the preamble, and there are many actions that can be and must be taken immediately and not be delayed. This should be reflected in the timeframes in the bill. Chiefs in British Columbia have indicated they believe this legislation meets the floor of the former Bill C-262, though they have identified areas where improvements are needed to address some drafting issues that may cause confusion and reinforce issues of importance, such as those I refer to here. We have provided you with a written table of our recommended improvements, which we are happy to make ourselves and our technical staff available for further brief you on, should you wish for more information regarding our position. I thank you for today for the time and we're in support of Bill C-15. Masicho.
Thank you very much, Chief. And next we have the Executive Chair, Harold Kalla from the First Nations Financial Management Board. Please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the invitation today. It only came to us yesterday, and while we do have some opening comments, we will be preparing a written brief that will be sent to you more fully. I want to thank our regional chief for his comments and Dale for his comments, most of which I agree with. I am a member of the Squamish First Nation, part of the Coast Salish community here in British Columbia, and have been involved in my community since 1987, dealing with many of the issues that existed in the colonial relationship between ourselves and the government of Canada that has resulted in litigation, poverty, and social dysfunction in our communities. One has to ask themselves, how do we change things? Well, it all has to start with a recognition that things have to change, first and foremost, and then to start discussing and engaging with one another on how that change takes place. Change will not occur and be successful unless we recognize that there needs to be a place in the Canadian economy for Indigenous communities, that their rights and title do attract a duty on the part of Canada to accommodate First Nations and to engage with First Nations around the decisions that are involved in resource extraction kinds of activities. I think that the Financial Management Board was founded as a result of all-party support in the House of Commons in 2005. It was developed as a result of First Nations wanting to come together to advance their economic interests in ways that could not be done under the existing Indian Act. The result is we now have over 300 First Nations scheduled to the Act. We have over 200 with financial administration laws, about 190 with financial performance certificates, and through the First Nations Finance Authority have been able to raise on behalf of First Nations about $1.3 billion in resources that they've been able to invest in their economies. The most notable of which you probably are all familiar with is the Clearwater transaction in Atlantic Canada. This comes about as a result of capacity being developed in First Nation communities to understand the kinds of opportunities that exist before them. I would suggest to you that we need clarity around Aboriginal rights and title. And I don't accept the notion that this doesn't begin that process of providing some clarity. You need to understand that the lack of clarity today is what has strangled resource development in this country for the last 10 years. And we need to change that dialogue. We need to be in a position where free, prior, and informed consent is not just a term, it's something that's practiced. And in order to do that, passage of this bill will trigger a massive investment required in Indian communities to be able to engage with the private sector, with the government of Canada on an equal footing, to create the means by which aggregation can occur so information can be supported and decisions can be made. I think there's a mistaken notion that everyone must agree. Not everyone's going to agree on anything. It doesn't agree in your communities, and it's not going to happen in ours. The question is, how do we deal with those differences? And I'm suggesting to you it's better if we're allowed to try to deal with them ourselves. The success of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition has taught me that over the last 6 years, that they can come together. Communities can come together and support one another in some of these projects, and actually have done so and developed environmental stewardship frameworks, and advanced some really important projects within their traditional territories. It has offered a place for First Nation communities to go to seek the advice and support that they need so that they can take their Aboriginal rights and title and do the due diligence required to see how they can actually implement them instead of talking about them as in theory. Access to capital is going to be absolutely critical in this process for First Nations to engage in the development of their economies. And through the Fiscal Management Act, we have proven that pooled borrowing and with the support of Canada can be a great success. I think we have to not be afraid of UNDRIP. We have to embrace it as an opportunity that has come about that will allow us to undo what past has brought upon us. And I think that that's going to be important in the future for us. I know that some will argue that this is going to create undue hardship on the private sector, on the Canadian economy. And I suggest to you that that is the exact opposite will occur with this kind of clarification. And I think that we have seen that occur in British Columbia with the work of the Major Projects Coalition, the support of Coastal GasLink. My own community issued its own certificate to develop the Woodfibre LNG project, and we engaged in our own process. So I think by this engagement process, by developing capacity, providing resources that allows for the due diligence to be done, you'll get to free, prior, informed consent in a way that everyone can have some confidence in. You need to create the framework for First Nations who may not be that large, who may not have the resources to be able to have access to the capacities that they need to deal with the matters that come before them. It doesn't matter whether you're the Squamish Nation with 4,000 people and a significant budget, or you're a smaller community in the north. The decisions that are required are the same, and the capacity gap between the two circumstances can be quite different unless we create a model that allows for this aggregation and support for the knowledge that's required to make these decisions. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity, and I will remind you that we will be providing a brief sometime in the near future to you on this matter.
I appreciate that. And to all of our witnesses today, following the meeting, if there's anything that you perhaps did not come up that you wish to point out, you can certainly submit a further written submission to our panel for the to consider. Thank you. And now we go to a 6-minute round of questioning. Eric Melillo, you are up first. Go ahead for 6 minutes.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I think it's Mr. Vidal that's going to be up first this morning, if that's all right with you.
My apologies. So, okay, Gary?
I have your permission. We're good?
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to first of all thank all of our witnesses for taking time to be here with us. I realize some of this is happening at last minute, as Mr. Calla spoke of, and we appreciate you accommodating and being here on short notice in some cases. Excellent testimony by all. I want to start with President Swampy this morning, and I want to get to others if the chair will grant me enough time to do that, but we seem to run into issues with that sometimes. Mr. Swampy, you spoke in your opening comments about many of the benefits and some of the very good elements of this legislation. I think we would all agree that there's very good components to this. You also spoke of some concerns around the legislation, and I did a little research yesterday, and I looked at the mandate of your organization, and it states very clearly that the National Coalition of Chiefs is committed to defeating on-reserve poverty. That's the reason that your organization exists. It seems in our political world, those that champion poverty reduction through economic development often get labeled as not having compassion for the people, and I would suggest or argue that it's exactly the opposite of that. We do have that compassion. And I would just like you to speak for a few minutes or a couple minutes about how in that spirit of compassion, how in that spirit of wanting to reduce on-reserve poverty or defeat on-reserve poverty, how responsible participation in economic development is key to that in your experience.
Well, we believe that the natural resource industry is the strongest industry in Canada. We have focused our means to our goal to partner with natural resource industries in order to bring us out of poverty. We believe that poverty is the cause for all of our social ills, whether it's teenage suicides, domestic violence, lack of education, everything you can think of that we have been struggling with for the last 150 years has come because we do not participate fully in this economy. And in order to participate fully in this economy, we need to grasp the natural resource industry as an ally and to work with the natural resource industry fully and participate and in some cases lead the natural resource industry. We've seen that happen in northern British Columbia and with TMX, the desire for First Nations to go out there and become part of this natural resource industry. We believe that the government has the duty and the right to recognize this problem that exists and continues to fester within our communities. And if we cannot excel in our ability to participate in this natural resource industries through legislation that's going to stifle investment, then we will be subject to abject poverty for many generations to come.
Thank you. I really appreciate your answer. I'm going to come back to you, President Swampy, and then Mr. Calla, if you could answer this question as well. Following that, I have about 2.5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get my question in quick and give you both a quick opportunity here before the chair cuts me off, okay? We have heard over and over again from people at how the action plan that's proposed in this legislation has the opportunity to bring a bunch of the clarity or to remove some of the uncertainty. My question is really simple. The action plan, with its 3-year window kind of going out, we're hearing that there's maybe some uncertainty created that. Would there have been some benefit in doing the action plan in lead up to the actual legislation, like, for example, New Zealand has done, and would it have brought a reduction in some of the uncertainty from your perspective in the investment climate and that element of all of this?
Well, I think it may well have. We are always finding ourselves in a position where we have to take what's being presented and start to implement it and improve upon it. I don't think I look at this as a failure of this initiative. I look at this as an opportunity to understand that this is going to become a living process. It will never be finalized. We will always continue to improve upon it as we move forward. And so I think that that doesn't mean that we can't begin to do the work and to be in a position where we could admit where we need to make some changes in the future. You got to start somewhere. And this is the best place that I see to start in my 35 years in this field. Thank you.
Thank you. President Swampy, would you like to respond to that as well?
Yes, well, we are having a hard time understanding exactly the process and whether or not it's going to provide any real benefits to First Nation communities. Canada itself is the premier leader in human rights. Canada is the premier leader in the duty to consult with industry and with First Nation, or industry's duty to consult and government's duty to consult with First Nations. I believe UNDRIP legislation is good for third world countries who do not have the kind of human rights records that we have. Third world countries and developing countries that do not have the legal requirements of industry to consult with Indigenous peoples. When Peru first incorporated their UNDRIP legislation, they were one of the first in the world to do such a thing, and that meant a lot for the Indigenous peoples in that country. I don't believe
we're ready to. Can you just conclude?
Yes, I believe what you say is true. The action plan should have been done before the legislation was passed.
Thanks very much. Mr. Pawlowski, 6 minutes.
I'm interested in how and if C-15 will change the current law, especially with respect to Aboriginal title. President Swampy says C-15 will create more uncertainty. On the other hand, Mr. Sella says this is the start of a way forward to create clarity. But I'm wondering, is there anything in UNDRIP that changes the modern notion of Aboriginal legal title as most recently established by the Socotine decision? I'm no expert on Aboriginal land title, but it seems to me that case decided the title was sui generis, but it was a beneficial interest in the land. There was some limitation, and the limitation was the land couldn't be used in a way that would deprive future generations of the benefits of the land. Looking to me at UNDRIP, I'm not sure how much that really changes anything, but I'm interested in what the panelists have to say about that. Is there any substantial change from the law as it currently is? Maybe I can start with Mr. or President Swampy, because I think he probably has an opinion on this.
Yeah, I don't believe the legislation and our discussions with legal experts, unless FPIC has some real value and actually does give veto power to the First Nations, I don't think any rights that are incorporated within the UNDRIP legislation doesn't actually enhance any rights that we already have.
And as for the First Nation Leadership Council of BC, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think, the UNDRIP is a recognition of human rights, of Indigenous rights, but ultimately that what Chilcotin identified was that title exists. And first and foremost, in terms of free, prior, and informed consent, it really demonstrates that no government has a veto. And this is what I stated when I spoke in the legislature of British Columbia in Victoria when we passed the bill, that within the declaration, there would be a space created where all governments came together and we would make the decision together in terms of identifying the best way forward, whether it's yes, no, or whatever the development project is. And I think it's a recognition that our authority is there, and it equalizes everything in terms of really our sovereignty and our self-determination as Indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Sorry, having trouble unmuting. Now, my understanding from the Socotine decision, the province has a right to regulate land use in the public interest. This is, however, federal legislation, and how do you envision that as being compatible when it's federal legislation with the provincial right to regulate with respect to land use in the public interest? Is there going to be a clash of jurisdictions in implementing this? Maybe President Swampy to begin with, and then BC Council, or I'm not sure if Mr. Sella, you have some comment on that.
In my opinion, and this comes from a lot of evaluation of what UNDRIP's potential can become, and we think that the legislation is ambiguous at best. It's going to create a lot of conflict, legal conflict between both provinces, First Nations, and the federal government. We're worried that this legislation is not being developed to enhance our ability to be able to participate in the economy and in the Canadian society as it should. We believe that it's a front for passing legislation, passing motions, passing policy to incorporate environmental restrictions on our natural resource industry. And I think this is very detrimental to both our natural resource industry and our First Nations who want to become part of the society, part of the economic structure within Canada. And we're worried that because the legislation doesn't enhance our First Nation rights, what is its use? Is it really going to enhance our ability to be able to stop racism? We think racism is a social ill of poverty. We believe that a lot of the social ills that exist within our communities come from the fact that we live in abject poverty. And we are out there to defeat that. And we cannot defeat that if there's another barrier for investment in the natural resource industry in Canada, which UNDRIP does provide.
Mr. Teague or Chief Teague or Mr.
GG.
Very briefly. Go ahead. 10 seconds.
Yeah, this would complement C41, what already is law here in British Columbia, and all we've seen is benefits from passing the law here in British Columbia with certainty and predictability within the industry. And we had the BC Business Council already support the C41, and also the Federation of Labor supported, amongst other many federations out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Madam Bérubé, for 6 minutes, please go ahead.
Ce serait Madame.
It'll be Madame Gill, Mr. Chair. So yeah, I understand the mistake. So thank you very much. Thank you to all the witnesses who are here. And it's very interesting to hear all of your ideas on the C15. I would have a question for all of the witnesses. We spoke several times about the fact that it would not increase the scope of rights of the First Nations, but at the same time we say that adopting it could be a problem. So how could things be worse? I'd like to, if you could explain in a concrete fashion, whether it be Mr. Swampy, Mr. TG, or Mr. Kalla. Thank you very much.
I can go first, I suppose. Well, I suppose what the declaration does, it changes the relationship with both levels of government, with all levels of government. And I think really we've already been through many court cases. We've been through social disruption. We've been through the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. We know what the problem is the fact that governments deny our rights. And for the most part, I really believe that what UNDRIP doesn't give us more rights, or really it doesn't do anything special in terms, but it really aligns the laws to recognize Indigenous rights of Indigenous peoples to self-govern and also for their sovereignty and self-determination. The changing of that relationship between governments will allow our people to flourish not only within economic development wise, but also with changing of laws for taking care of our children, the healthcare, policing. We've just seen all the issues with policing. We need to take jurisdiction, and this is an overarching bill that can do that, where we can have alignment of laws, of many laws out there. Now, I'm the chair of the Chiefs Committee on Economic Development, and certainly what this allows for industry to have more predictability and more certainty in terms of projects. And this is where we need to come together and not end up in court or have some other mechanism to realize that certainty. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that the government's commitment to reconciliation, to working with First Nations to resolve the kind of problems that exist right now is unprecedented. I think they're doing a great job in trying to work with First Nation communities and leaders to, enhance our ability to be able to become part of Canada. And I think that's very important. We'd like to see the enhancement of our natural resource industry and our participation in the natural resource industry. And I think the only way to do that is to empower the people that protect the environment and have a direct tie to the environment so deeply, and that's the indigenous people, to empower them to be able to control natural resource industry development, to give them ownership of natural resource development. Don't give them participation or duty to consult or requirement to be on page with local developments within their area. Have them lead it. 13 bills of Congress in the Alaska Territory that enhance the tribal nations' ability to be able to own natural resources proved to be very advantageous for the tribes in Alaska. We can do that in Canada. We can give our people ownership of the natural resources, and we can protect the natural resources because we are tied to the natural resources and have been for thousands of years. And I think that's one of the goals that I'd like to see happen with the action plan, is to develop a process to allow us to be able to get ownership of our natural resources.
1 minute.
If I might. I think, to answer the question, I think it starts with recognition, as Chief TG has said. I think one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about the resource industry. I think we all have to become aware of the emergence of ESG as a principle that's going to impact resource development around the world. And in that process is going to be fundamental. So I think bringing clarity and starting to bring clarity through this piece of legislation is going to help in that process. Thank you.
Merci. Donc,
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that there is a consensus on the fact that it is positive as a bill, despite all of the requests that are made. I would imagine that I don't have any further time, but so I'd like to thank the witnesses.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Ms. Gazan for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. My first question is actually for Regional Chief Teague. Your province in BC has passed UNDRIPA, but due to the failure of the BC government to uphold the human rights contained within the declaration in regards to obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous people with current resource projects, many concerns have been raised about whether the implementation of UNDRIPA will result in a renewed relationship with Indigenous peoples grounded in human rights. I know you've spoken a little bit about this. Why in regards, like, why do you still have faith considering what's currently going on BC? And do you believe that the implementation of UNDRIPA is still a valid step forward given the current climate in the province?
Well, I think what you're speaking of is some of the projects that already exist pre C41, and sadly, it isn't retroactive in terms of the decisions that were made many years ago. Rather, it's forward-looking. But I think, you know, this being a bill that was born out of Bill 262, and certainly we appreciate Romeo Saganish's work as a private member's bill. I really believe that this is a place where we can really change that relationship in terms of recognizing human rights and Indigenous rights and our ability for sovereignty and self-determination. I believe that here in British Columbia, we have been working on the alignment of laws and the action plan right now, and it's been well over 15 months. With this bill, with our experience here in British Columbia, we need to start, if it does pass, is to really start the action plan as soon as we can, within 18 months, not 3 years, and need the resourcing for this to make sure that it's fully implemented the way it is meant to be, as when it was first passed many years ago in September 2007. And I think, you know, that really is what we're trying to do here in British Columbia. And although the point I'm trying to make is that here in British Columbia, there was no real instruction, a manual to how to implement this, and we've developed a process, and now it's working. So
just on that, I know that there's been many questions around Bill C-15 and the action plan, certainly concerns raised. I know specifically with Bill 41 that there was no specific timeline mentioned. What have been some of the, in the development of the action plan, what are some of the challenges you're experiencing right now? Just lesson learned as we move forward with Bill C-15, hopefully.
Well, the development of the action plan, we've started out as soon as the bill was passed. However, the pandemic didn't help matters in the past year, but we're nearly complete the action plan. And the alignment of laws is really what we're working on right now, especially with child welfare. One of the bills that I worked on and was a lead on, was the environmental assessment bill, where the amendments were made, allowed for First Nations to implement their own environmental assessment process. And we need that law to align with the UNDRIP, where we can get to free, prior, informed consent and make decisions together. Currently, my background is forestry. I'm a former registered professional forester. We're working on Forest Range and Practices Act, and a number of acts out there that currently we're in development of amendments with the province of BC, such as the Police Act, which we fully well know that Indigenous people need to be a part of that discussion. And perhaps moving forward, we need to look at the Health Act here in this province. This pandemic showed the shortfalls of the society and how governments really treat Indigenous peoples in this country, in this province.
So my last question to you, actually, going back to what you were talking about in decision-making agreements, and Article 7 of Bill 41 affirms the process for decision-making agreements. Can you share why this is important? I'm going to give you an example. Certainly I've talked about a lot. So in Wet'suwet'en territory, there's an ongoing division between hereditary and band council chiefs in regards to the LNG project. What does this provision, specific provision, allow in this circumstance?
Well, I think, you know, those issues need to be worked out by themselves. A year ago, we had a meeting that was to look at overlap in shared territories, but was cut short because everybody was in lockdown right in the middle of that meeting. But our people have to address these issues on our own, and it was well stated there. And I think the Wet'suwet'en, as a result of this court case, which my family was a part of, the Delgamuukw stay-away court case, really demonstrated that Aboriginal rights exist. And it comes back to our Indigenous peoples to work those issues out in terms of band council versus hereditary chiefs and how decisions are made. Now, UNDRIP would allow that in terms of what would really, I think, was always existed, was that hereditary chiefs are right to make decisions in our own traditional governments is recognized. So I think it really comes back upon ourselves to work those issues out. And I think, you know, what UNDRIP allows is the recognition that hereditary chiefs and our traditional governments have decision-making authority.
Yeah, so it's what you're saying is I had the privilege of working with the National Center for First Nations Governance for a number of years. Would you say that the issue is more related to Indigenous peoples making decisions on how, on their own internal governance in terms of a clearer way to proceed forward rather than arguments around FPIC?
Just briefly, please.
Yeah, I think self-determination and you know, our own sovereignty is our ability to make our own decisions, and I think that that's what really is recognized within the United Nations declarations is our human rights and our Indigenous rights to govern ourselves. And whether it's the colonial construct of chief and council versus our own, I think at some point we're going to have to reconcile those ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. That brings to a close this portion of our committee meeting today. We're going to suspend briefly and set up our next panel. Once again, thank you so much. And if there's anything that you feel needs to be emphasized or something that wasn't brought up, please feel free to make a written submission to our committee. We'll suspend now for just a few minutes. please submit a written document, written submission to, in view of the fact that we're not able at the moment to technically connect you with the meeting. And so we'll move on then. With quorum, I call this meeting back to order and ask Chief Abel Bosom and Tina Petawabano from the Federal Indigenous Relations Grand Council of the Crees to begin for 6 minutes. Please go ahead, Chief Bosom.
Wajah, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about the importance of Bill C-15 and the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I've been following very carefully the dialogues that have taken place during this hearing with the witnesses who have thus far appeared before you. I'd like to focus my remarks today on what I believe has been one of the most critical issues of concern by members of this committee, namely the free, prior, and informed consent and its relationship to the notion of veto. I address this issue from the perspective of an Indigenous nation that has real and on-the-ground experience in dealing with the critical intersection between resource development projects and Indigenous rights. The experience that we offer demonstrates very clearly that not only is the affirmation of Indigenous rights not incompatible with the certainty that is required to promote favorable investment climates, but rather that we have demonstrated that the affirmation of our rights is the necessary condition for investment certainty and for orderly and sustainable development. What we've developed in Northern Quebec is a framework that provides space for rights holders, space for stakeholders, and space for public at large to be involved so as to repeatedly produce a win-win-win situation. This is not just rhetoric. It's not wishful thinking. This is the result of our sleeve rolling up and doing the hard work of hammering out agreements that reflect the diverse interests which are at play in these circumstances. Please let me state clearly that the notion of veto is not something that is in our vocabulary when we deal with resource development projects. Similarly, the concept of veto is not something that appears in either in Bill C-15 or in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. When resource development projects within our traditional territory are proposed, we address them through our treaty, the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, and in particular, Section 22, which provides for the environmental and social impact assessment for such projects. This process takes into account our people's environmental and social concerns, and the process results in our involvement in such projects, including environmental monitoring, employment, and financial benefits. This environmental and social impact assessment process is a forum that provides for deep engagement. Our engagement has included non-Indigenous communities in the region, various levels of government, Hydro-Quebec, mining, forestry, and other industries. We actually work with project proponents to make their projects more sound environmentally and also more sound from a business perspective. Has this process of engagement result in our ever saying no to a project? Yes. Most recently, in the context of a proposed uranium project, which after much dialogue and much public hearings, we determined that the project did not meet our standard for social acceptability. But that conclusion was not an absolute declaration. It was a result of an intensive process of engagement. It was a conclusion arrived at through the legitimate process of considering diverse perspectives, diverse interests, and diverse opinions. This is how we in Northern Quebec express the notion of free, prior, and informed consent, as it should be, and so much more than only to be able to say yes to a project. We're no longer in an era of resource development in Canada where projects are undertaken out of sight or out of mind. The world has become a smaller place, and it's no longer possible anywhere in the world to pretend that development can supersede all other interests. This is a reality that has required that we all find the path that works for our territory, and we have done so in an honorable way. Bill C-15 and the UN Declaration are not about enabling unilateral declaration. They're precisely about the opposite. They are about transitioning from the past when such declarations were a norm to a reality in which everyone has a voice. The UN Declaration is about inclusiveness through honorable engagement. We've worked hard over the last 45 years to find the right balance of Indigenous rights, development, and governance. If it can be done in Northern Quebec in a way that diverse voices find beneficial, then it can be done across the country. The UN Declaration will set the standard for the necessary conversations and the necessary engagement, which must freely take place wherever there is an intersection between resource development and Indigenous lands. Anything less would entail a perpetuation of paternalism and colonialism. And as we all surely know by now, those are dead ends that serve no one in the long run. Miigwech, merci, and thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, we go to Mr. Johnson, and you have 6 minutes along with Ms. Inutik. Go ahead, please.
Ajay Chepot, Tokwanan Kwatnan, Tawach Tla'aman, Cheche Hatanapech, honorable members of Parliament. Thank you for the invitation to provide some remarks on Bill C-15 from a modern treaty perspective. My name is Dylan Johnson. My Tla'aman name is Tokwanan, and I'm a member of the Tla'aman Nation Executive Council. As mentioned in my sound check, Tla'aman Nation territory is located in the area now more commonly known as the Sunshine Coast of BC. We are a Northern Coast Salish nation that negotiated a modern treaty that took effect in 2016. Tla'aman Nation is a member of the Land Claims Agreements Coalition, or LCAC, which was formed in 2003 by modern treaty holders to collectively address modern treaty implementation issues that are of a federal nature. Modern treaties are comprehensive land claims agreements. The first was the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, entered into in 1975. 26 modern treaties now exist in BC, Yukon, NWT, Nunavut, Quebec, and Newfoundland and Labrador, and cover more than 40% of Canada's land mass. Tla'aman Nation is also a member of the Alliance of BC Modern Treaty Nations, which was formed in 2018 to collectively address modern treaty implementation issues that are of a provincial nature. All 8 modern treaty nations in BC are members of the Alliance, and we are currently actively engaged with the province on developing an action plan to implement BC's UN declaration legislation, which is quite similar to Bill C-15, and it came into force in November 2019. Our messages in that work are similar to the messages I'm pleased to be able to share with the committee today. I'll focus primarily on what many consider from a modern treaty perspective to be the most significant provision of the declaration, namely Article 37. And then I'll close with a few points on the action plan required under Section 6 of the Act. Under Article 37, 1 and 2, Indigenous peoples have the right to recognition, observance, and enforcement of treaties, and nothing in the declaration may be interpreted as diminishing or eliminating the rights of Indigenous peoples contained in treaties. The effect of Article 37 is clear. Every other article set out in the declaration must be read in the light of the primacy of the right of modern treaty holders in Canada to have their treaties recognized, observed, and enforced. I must say this is not to minimize or detract from the importance of the other articles set out in the declaration, each of which must be implemented to enable the full recognition, promotion, and protection of the rights of Indigenous peoples. Treaty rights are already recognized in Section 35 of the Constitution, but those rights have too often not been observed by politicians in their legislative initiatives, nor by officials in their administrative actions, or when exercising statutory authority. The requirement under Section 5 of the Act that government must take all measures necessary to ensure that the laws of Canada are consistent with the Declaration means ensuring treaty rights will not be diminished or eliminated by legislation or any administrative action contemplated by legislation. This is what Article 37 requires. So, when enacting legislation, entering agreements, adopting policies, or contemplating administrative action, government must determine whether doing so would diminish or eliminate a right under a modern treaty. And when exercising statutory authority, every statutory decision maker must ensure that their decision is consistent with the recognition, observation, and enforcement of modern treaty rights. The declaration recognizes the distinct standing of Indigenous peoples with treaties. In light of this, it seems appropriate that the action plan contemplated by Section 6 of the Act should have a separate chapter for modern treaty partners. In my view, as a representative of a modern treaty partner, an effective action plan should include an upfront commitment to the timely, effective, and fully resourced implementation of modern treaties and detailed actions to support this commitment. Unfortunately, the timely, effective, and fully resourced implementation of treaties has not been a priority for the Government of Canada. When we entered into our treaties, the government repeatedly avowed that modern treaties are the ultimate expression of reconciliation. However, time and time again, we have encountered challenges in advancing our government-to-government relationship and our shared commitment to treaty implementation. This act and the development and implementation of the action plan provides the Government of Canada and its modern treaty partners a unique opportunity to transform our government-to-government relationship and align it with the requirements of the declaration. We are committed to working collaboratively, efficiently, and productively with the government to build the kind of treaty partnership that all sides envisioned when we entered into our treaties. So thank you for the time today, and look forward to the question period. Such.
Thank you very much for your submissions. And so now we'll go to a 6-minute round of questioning. I have Mr. Schmale, Mrs. Zan, Ms. Gill, Ms. Gazan. Jamie, go ahead, please. 6 minutes.
Actually, Chair, is Mr. Viersen.
Go ahead, Mr. Viersen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. The bill is fairly straightforward. There's a long preamble and a long appendix at the end, but the actual meat and potatoes of the bill really comes down to Section 4, A and B. A is that affirm that the declaration, so UNDRIP, has as a universal international human rights instrument with application in Canadian law. So that's the first part of the bill, and the second part is to provide a framework for the Government of Canada's implementation of this declaration. Conservatives don't have any issue with the Section B as to the implementation of the framework, that part. But what we are concerned about is just basically Canadian sovereignty and the mandating of a UN document as to be Canadian law. So I guess I'll start with Mr. Johnson, just around, you reference Section 35, I think, of the Constitution. If maybe I was mistaken on that, but I thought you referenced that. Is that not where we want to start with rather than the UN declaration?
Yeah, I mean, treaties, modern treaties, they need to mean something. We negotiated these agreements, and they have the strength of the Constitution protecting them. I guess our view on UNDRIP, or at least my view on UNDRIP, and I've heard other members of the LCAC and Alliance, say as well, is that this provides an opportunity for modern treaty nations to elevate, the kind of focus of treaties within Canada, because although we've entered into these agreements that are constitutionally protected under Section 35, we're treated as an afterthought, we've met the agreement or we've reached the agreement and, we go our separate ways. Whereas, we want what we were promised, which is a evolving living relationship, more of a marriage than a divorce. So with UNDRIP, or this, legislation and the action plan and the resulting, reform of bringing legislation in line, we see this as an opportunity to bring a whole of government focus.
I guess just to clarify, what does the application in Canadian law, what does that term mean in relation to UNDRIP that you don't have under Section 35?
The application of Canadian law.
Well, so
under UNDRIP.
So Section 4A just says that UNDRIP will now have application in Canadian law. I'm just trying to understand what that means, and how does that change? How does that change what we currently have, where under Section 35 we already have, right? What changes?
Well, I think UNDRIP?
having application in Canadian law.
Isn't that an exercise that needs to be sorted out within, the bringing legislation in line with, like, there's a whole, isn't there a commitment to make sure to update the laws?
That's the second part of the bill. Like, the bill basically does two things. So the first part is just declaring that UNDRIP has application in Canadian law. The second part is providing a framework to engage the government of Canada in the implementation of the declaration, which nobody has a problem with that. It's just the weird statement about making UNDRIP have application in Canadian law. What does that mean? Does that mean that the court decisions that have been hard won and fought for of the past, are they now are they mute given UNDRIP says something different? What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. That's what Article 37 is supposed to be, why that's a focus of many of the members of the LCAC, is because they see potentially that exactly what you're getting at, where there'll be groups without Section 35 protected or established rights and rights kind of taking precedence over Section 35 rights. So that's a concern, but that's why we're saying Article 37 needs to have primacy, I suppose, over the other articles, making sure that those Section 35 rights that have been established are not infringed upon.
All right. I'll ask Mr. Bossum, kind of in the same vein, just around the application, a UN document having application in Canadian law versus the Canadian Constitution and our jurisprudence over the last number of generations. Is there any concern that there will be a conflict between those two?
Good afternoon. Grand Chief Bossum just is having some technical issues.
Okay.
So he's trying to come back on.
Did you want to speak on his behalf?
I will wait. He's just getting back on, so I would prefer that he would.
Mr. Picard, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
I don't believe we have him connected.
All right. Should we? How is this going to work, Mr. President or Mr. Chair?
Well, Mr. Viersen, let me offer you some time.
Okay.
After the next round of questioning, I'll keep a couple of minutes open for you. Okay, so you can follow up with that.
Okay.
And so we'll go now to Lenore Zan for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair Walalan, and I come to you today from the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you very much for your presentations. And I certainly agree with everything that has been said here, that it is time to change, and it is time for governments on all levels to listen to and respect First Nations across the country, and work with them in consultation to create a better future for all children. So I'd like to just focus for now on the free, prior, and informed consent. It seems that it is increasingly central to public discourse and policy debate regarding Indigenous reconciliation. And at the same time, however, the meaning, nature, and roots of FPIC are poorly understood, including how it's understood in domestic and in international law, its foundations in Indigenous legal orders, the relationship of FPIC to Indigenous sovereignty and jurisdiction, and how the in governments is connected to the implementation of FPIC. So could you speak to me, please, Chief, where is he? Chief Abun, is he there or is he gone?
No, technically we're not connected, so.
Technically we're, okay, would Mr. Johnson like to speak to that?
Thank you for the question. On the topic of FPIC, I'm not the most qualified to speak to this whole matter. So
okay.
Yeah. So
No worries.
I defer to.
Would one of the other witnesses like to speak to this? Free, prior, and informed consent.
Let me ask Mr. Picard, who's joined us. Mr. Picard, can you open your mic and give us a brief sample so that we can ensure the translation works?
Oui, bonjour. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, are we good to go with Mr. Picard?
It's difficult to say. Perhaps we'll try and get his answer to the question, and then I'll be able to give an indication.
So, Lenore, could you repeat the question? And we'll ask Mr. Picard to try to respond, and that should solve our technical issue.
Okay, perhaps I'll put it in another way. It seems that the most contentious article in UNDRIP for some people is the right whether free, prior, and informed consent means that First Nations will have a veto over resource development on their traditional territories, and that the bill would create another avenue for legal challenges for development projects. So the people who oppose this bill seem to feel that this will stop development and stop resource development under any circumstance and weaponize UNDRIP against First Nations and other rural communities who favor such development. But can you explain to us actually what free, prior, and informed consent actually means?
Écoutez, merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you very much. I will answer in French if you will allow me. Well, first of all, I'm very sorry. All my apologies. I've just been through 30 minutes of technical problems that meant that I was not able to join you in time. And we would like to share our point of view in terms of the First Nations for Quebec and Labrador, and the amendments that we would like to, and give you our perspective. And we believe that the Cree regional government should be making comments, and those comments really merit our respect. And we don't always share the opinion, and that's important to note. For me, the question of free, prior, and informed consent is one of the elements of the declaration, and you have confirmed the fact that it does bring up a huge concern. At the same time, I think that it's still useful to remember that the declaration as a whole gives responsibility to all parties that are involved, and so that is just as relevant for industries, government, as well as the governments of the First Nations. So I think we really need to look at it from that point of view, and that this free, prior, and informed consent needs to be taken in that light. And there is a vulnerability with respect to the interpretations of what I would call situations where there is uncertainty, a climate of uncertainty politically, but also with respect to resource development. For example, what is being said by the present Quebec government that is foreseeing a dark period. And so if C-15 were to be adopted, recognizing the principles of the declaration in their entirety, I think that we have to be very careful, because we are all somewhat vulnerable to what I would call the interpreter, sorry, but it cut out there, so that there is an uncertainty and for all parties, both the Government of Canada and the First Nations government, as well as with industry.
Because of the issues. Ms. Zan, I have a hand up from one of our witnesses, and the screen keeps, oh, there you are, Ms. Initik. Did you want to comment to Ms. Zan's question?
Actually, it was my understanding that I was appearing as a witness and that I had 6 minutes, so I just wanted clarification on that.
Mr. Johnson and and yourself were part of one particular group of witnesses. So typically that would be a 6 minutes shared. And however, in view of the calamities befalling us technically, is there something that you would like to add to the commentary now? I can't give you 6 minutes right now, but I could offer you a couple of minutes.
Or I could ask a question.
Okay. Lenore Zan, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. And so my question would be, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, not only call on governments to fully adopt and implement the declaration, but number 44 specifically calls for the development of an action plan to achieve the UN declaration's goals. Could you please comment on the importance of the development of an action plan being part of this legislation and what you believe would be essential to a well-designed process to develop and implement that action plan?
Initik, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. I'm actually part of the action planning process for the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women Calls to Justice. So it's really interesting, just the learning from that process and how it could work. The action plan is a critical piece of this process because we don't know how the UNDRIP bill will affect our communities, how it will impact. And so that piece in terms of how it will impact our communities is that action plan. A lot of those of us that have modern treaties, or in our case, we even have a public government that was a product of our modern treaty, are still facing severe poverty, housing crisis, and our language is declining, and our children, 3/4 of our children go hungry each day. So there's still, it's obvious that systemic discrimination and racism are still very endemic in our systems, and the bill has potential to create that conversation and work towards dealing with those systemic discrimination, racism, and that's in that action plan. So I'll end there.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you
have
so
a hand up. Thanks, Ms. Dan. I have Ms. Gill and Ms. Petawabano with their hand up. Ms. Gill, do you have a question? You'll be speaking next.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was thinking, because of the technical difficulties, I was wondering if we could give Chief Picard some time to be able to do his presentation, if we need to get to unanimous consent to be able to go over our normal time. Because of unfortunate technical problems, it's unfortunate that our witnesses wouldn't be able to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Petawabano, did you have your question or comment that you wanted to?
I wanted to comment on two of the first questions that were put forth. Since my Grand Chief is still trying to get on board, may I?
Please go ahead.
So for the first question that was put forth, it should be understood that the preamble that is an important part of Bill C-15. It lays out the principles by which the operative sections of the bill must be interpreted. They are not peripheral, they are essential and critical. In their totality, Bill C-15 provides for the robust framework for leveling the playing field and provides for genuine inclusiveness of Indigenous peoples in the economic life of government. The application in Canadian law clause provides the basis for ensuring that all laws of Canada must be consistent with the provisions of UNDRIP. So this was our first comment to the first question.
Thank you very much. Committee, I'm going to ask for consent to go past our time in order to pick up some of the lost testimony and so on. So could I have see a show of hands if we're all okay with going past the appointed time? We good? Okay. So in order to accommodate what has been missed, before we get to Ms. Gill, who is the next questioner, I believe you wanted Monsieur Picard to make his statement. So Mr. Picard, I don't see your picture on the screen, but I assume you can hear me. Were there points of your testimony that you weren't able to make that you would like to make now?
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. What we had prepared, and obviously technical issues have sort of taken over many of us, and with the difficulty of providing a full statement. And I could certainly, depending on the time you would allow me, provide my comments within. It probably would require about, I would say, roughly 5 minutes. Is that possible, okay, or do you want me to shorten that?
Well, 5 minutes would be all right. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So I'll do it in the two official languages, starting with French. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you very much to each and every one of you. The Assembly of First Nations Quebec-Labrador thanks the committee for the opportunity to present within the study on Bill C-15, an act respecting the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. We have more than 40 communities in Quebec and Labrador. With respect to the missions, we would like to note that we want to affirm the recognition and the coordination of positions of the First Nations and their representation of their positions and their interests before different fora. We would like to give you a brief with respect to C-15, and our brief reflects the opinion of most of the First Nations in our region. You have heard, or you will heard, the position of the Cree Nation, and their position deserves our respect, even if in our brief we will confirm that we do not necessarily share all of the same perspectives. And we would like to ask that the amendments be brought forward to be able to clarify and reinforce certain parts of C-15, a bill which is extremely important. To that effect, we would like to see that the motion be unanimously adopted, that the amendments to C-15 are minimal conditions so that the Assembly, the AFNQL, would be able to support this bill. The implementation of the rights and the principles following through from the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is essential so that C-15 will be able to go above and beyond the status quo. Let's be clear. We want to support the principle for a bill that would set up the implementation of the declaration, but we can't support C-15 as it is in its form now. The bill has to go much further. The political situation in Quebec has a situation where between the First Nation and the provincial government we see the provincial government that is refusing to implementation in Quebec. despite the resolution of the National Assembly, which states that they must negotiate its implementation. So we have the First Nation families, the Inuit and the Métis. We have C-92 that has been adopted. It is being contested at the Court of Appeal of Quebec, and the federal government is going to be filing more federal government with respect to health and with respect to policing of the First Nation. It's essential that the legislative framework to be ensured so that all federal legislation be compatible with the rights and principles that follow through from the Declaration, and it must mean that we must work in partnership as nation to nation with for the Aboriginal peoples to get concrete results for our peoples of our community. And we want to move ahead. The Prime Minister wants to move ahead with reconciliation, and that's clear. But so it's important to note that reconciliation within the Canadian framework means that there has to be a clear commitment by the provinces, which is an essential condition for any and all progress with the First Nations. And this must be done, and we can't have the First Nations have to be able to continue to exercise their rights and the rights of self-determination.
Out of vigorous examination of the bill, and we conclude that essential amendments are required so that it meets the minimum standard of legal and political acceptability. Several provisions of the bill must be amended to move beyond the status quo, including achieving certainty that the provisions of the UN Declaration will be applied to interpret Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 and to enable the effective implementation of UNDRIP in Canadian law. The following amendments to Bill C-15 have been identified for the bill to meet a minimum standard. 1. During a discussion with the FNQL on March 12th, Mr. Lametti indicated that his understanding was that UNDRIP should serve to interpret Section 35. The statement has also been made by Minister Bennett and the AFN. Unfortunately, Section 2.2 of the bill fails to clearly state this and meet this standard. Therefore, Section 2.2 should be amended to expressly state A, that the laws of Canada, including Section 35, must be interpreted in accordance with the rights and principles derived from UNDRIP. B, that the law does not operate to abrogate or limit the Aboriginal and treaty rights of Indigenous peoples recognized and affirmed by Section 35. 2, the wording in this same section concerning non-derogation should therefore be removed from this provision. 3, we are also concerned about over-reliance of an expansive preamble that fails to reflect the substantive provisions of the bill. Numerous preambular provisions, the body of the bill. Most importantly, our region has identified that the bill must include a substantive provision in the body of the bill devoted to the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery in Canadian law. 4, finally, the bill must include a provision requiring that all courts consider the rights and principles of UNDRIP when ruling on matters, issues, or subjects directly or indirectly Aboriginal and treaty rights of Indigenous peoples. These amendments are what is minimally required for this bill to obtain support from the Assembly of First Nations, Quebec and Labrador, and our written brief also proposes additional amendments that should be considered. The FNQL deplores the fact that the emergency has lasted far too long regarding the adoption of the bill to implement the declaration, and that we are now being asked to support this bill under duress. A bill of such great importance cannot be subject to instrumentalization, problem with that word, with urgency as its sole argument. The FNQL fully supports the principles of UNDRIP. However, the FNQL opposes Bill C-15 in its current form and has clearly indicated which amendments could be made to make it more acceptable. This is not necessarily a missed opportunity, and Canada can still do what it takes. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Commandant. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Picard. So we'll continue now with the 6-minute round of questioning with Ms. Gill, Madame Gill, followed by Ms. Gazan. And I offered Mr. Viersen a couple of more minutes after his session. So we'll go now to Madame Gill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to all of the witnesses. What you've said is very important for our study. I would like to ask a question of Chief Picard with respect to the presentation that he's just done. You spoke about the preamble and the question of provisions, substantive provisions. So I'm wondering if you might be able to go a little bit further within the criticism that you're making with respect to this bill for our benefit. Well, thank you very much. Briefly, I think that our brief will go into detail and will explain the amendments that we're proposing to be able to strengthen this bill, and I think that many agree that there are elements of the preamble that should be within the substance of the bill, and especially the question of the repudiation. In fact, we're talking about doctrines of superiority that do include this important aspect of the discovery. And I think that it has been proven. I don't see why Canada should hesitate to that extent to include it within the substance of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Picard. I don't know if Chief Bozum, whether he is with us right now. I would have liked to hear his perspective because we would like to take his opinion into consideration in our study of the bill. Mr. Picard, you have said that we should have more time to be able to do things correctly. We do have some urgency on the one hand, but on the other hand, we need to do things properly to be able to bring forward amendments. So how do you think we should base our work, and in what way would we be able to move forward as quickly as possible, if that is possible? Well, answer, well, to the extent that is possible, I think we should be able to do it. I can't give you any definite calendar with respect to the work that needs to be done. The principle that I want to insist upon is that we have to balance urgency and doing things properly. And I think that it's important, and we want to share that concern to the effect that we want to have a proper balance between those two elements, urgency and doing things properly. And I think we're all faced with that particular reality. We do understand that there is a legislative process underway, and there's nothing guaranteed, nothing is complete. And however, what we would like to insist upon is that we feel that we do have a wonderful opportunity here. And maybe I'm repeating myself, but I think that we support the principle of the bill that would ensure that the declaration is respected. So I think that there is an element that we can't forget, and that is the fact that without trying to put blame on anywhere, we do have to look at the geopolitical context, which is quite variable across the country. There are some provinces where they're asking for more time before they would adopt this C-15, but on the other hand, we also are faced with similar arguments, but for other reasons. So as I was saying, in the example of Quebec, and there are other jurisdictions across Canada where we have heard their positions, but for Quebec, we have a Quebec government that really is in no hurry to take a look at considering such a thing as Bill C-15. Thank you, Mr. Picard. I find that it's interesting the different geopolitical problems, but we have more than 600 First Nations on our territory. Of the First Nations, not the territory of Canada. So I would think that there's a lot of differences from one area to another, even within the First Nations communities. Yes, and there's Quebec and Labrador, but have you seen that there's a lot of differences across other Canadian jurisdictions? Well, Madame, I think we need to look at the political reality that has been expressed through our different nations, and some parties where they have to take into consideration the political context. So there are nations that have acquired certain rights, but others not. So I think that this has been demonstrated, and I can speak about Quebec because this is the reality that I'm most familiar with and that I have to work with on a regular basis. So last week, last Friday, we had a second meeting with Mr. Legault's government with the presence of the Prime Minister. This was the second meeting since he's come to power. And Mr. Legault reiterated the numbers that we were paying, and he sits at our table, and the same things that were presented last November, and there's a provincial prime minister that says we really aren't interested in implementing this declaration. And so these are arguments that are put forward based on the supposed veto, and also there's the question of the principle that there may be too much coercion there within these principles. So I think that we're really very far from a climate where we would really be able to have open and frank discussions and complete discussions with respect to the implementing of the declaration provincially. And I don't think Quebec is the only one in that situation. Thank you very much.
6 minutes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Regional Chief Picard. I found your comments about the Quebec government not ready to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People peculiar, particularly because the JBNQA uses the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples really as a framework for negotiation, something that is currently being even used right now by the Legault government. So I'm wondering why this has shifted, knowing that certainly we've seen with the decrees of EU-SG that they have signed several agreements over the past 45 years by utilizing the framework. Why would you come out so strongly against the minimum human rights that have clearly afforded strong relationships in the province?
Well, let me just rectify, and we're not going against any of the minimal standards that are promoted by the UN Declaration. You know, we support the declaration in its entirety, but the means to implement it, that's where we have some difficulty, and I, you know, and understanding and knowing the lay of the ground in Quebec from a political perspective and from a geopolitical perspective, I think will certainly indicate that, you know, there are some nations that, and with all due respect, you know, this is not a criticism. With all due respect, the kind of leverage that some nations have is not the leverage other nations
Yes, I agree with you. That's certainly reality. The reality, however, would you not agree with me that specifically with the JBNQA, since it's been enacted 45 years, that it has modeled positive relationships based within the minimum rights afforded through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, something that all Indigenous peoples and nations throughout the country should be afforded the same level of respect, something that is not happening. Would you agree with me?
That's exactly, I totally agree with you, and that's exactly what we're seeking. But there again, and at the risk of repeating myself, and this is a reality faced throughout Canada, and how could I put it? I think maybe the nations under there are 3 treaties in Quebec, including the Naskapi and the Inuit, and to me, they have the kind of relationship that other nations in Quebec would hope for, and supported through legislation as well. So those rights or those new rights are implemented through legislation. But I'm not the one to speak about that in detail. I'm just referring to that situation to say that this is the kind of leverage that we're hoping to achieve for other nations.
Yes, I say that because I know that with Bill C-262, the AFNQL adopted a unanimous resolution in support of Bill C-262. We now have on the table, and I'm a New Democrat, I'm talking about a Liberal bill here, but we have on the table really essentially Bill C-262, now called C-15, yet now there's all these alarm bells being raised. Even though we know both bills are similar, I find that concerning, particularly with the fact that you commented about the preamble. And I know there has been criticism of the preamble of Bill C-15 as not being legally binding and a means to confuse and mislead Indigenous peoples and nations. That's one of the things that have been quoted. We know that this is totally an inaccurate understanding of the role preambles play in legislation, especially in light how the Federal Interpretation Act, Article 13, defines legal effect of a preamble, and I'm going to quote it. In fact, 13, the preamble of an enactment shall be read as part of the enactment intended to assist in explaining its purport and object. That's the Federal Interpretation Act with legislation. So I'm wondering where the concerns are coming from about the preambles not having legal effect with Bill C-15.
I think we certainly, I would be of the opinion that we certainly have the right to review our position, reassess our positions in light of the current political context. And since 262, what have we experienced? And this is where I go back to, the position by provinces. We all know that at least 6 jurisdictions have expressed concern going back to last fall, before as the federal government was getting ready to introduce C-15 in December. And at the time, what we also had in that evolving political context, if you will, is a province, Quebec, challenging a bill that was co-developed with First Nations, which is C-92, the same for C-91. And this is where we express very, in my view, legitimate concerns in terms of making sure that this C-15, and again, I want to restate that the fact that the UN Declaration poses no questions or concerns when it comes to our First Nations. Yes, is how we ensure how we ensure to give it the proper strength to be properly implemented, considering the geopolitics across the country.
Okay, we're at time there. I'm going to
thank you so much.
Thanks,
thank you so much,
Ms. Gazan. We're going to conclude with 2 things. One, I'm going to ask Mr. Picard to submit to the clerk the amendments that you discussed, and secondly, I have allowed Mr. Viersen another question because of the interruption that occurred earlier. So, Arnold, you have
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to welcome Mr. Picard back to the meeting here. I just had a question about him, and for him about, and I'm not sure if he heard it the first time. So myself and Mr. Johnson engaged in a bit of a conversation just around the terminology about the UNDRIP having application in Canadian law, and I'm just wondering, is he concerned at all about the terminology that is laid out in UNDRIP and the terminology that has come over generations of legislation and jurisprudence in this country? For example, FPIC versus the duty to consult. The duty to consult was a hard-won battle in the courts of Canada. Is he not concerned that if we introduce a new concept into Canadian law of FPIC, that we will be muddying the waters around what is the duty to consult and what is FPIC, and just essentially start a whole new round of court battles? Just want his opinions on that. Mr. Picard?
Well, I think it would be certainly, I'll try to respond, the way I understand your question and the best way possible. Obviously, the duty to consult has, been framed by different courts at nationally, and then we move it a step further, within the language of the declaration, in speaking or referring to FPIC, as a, some would interpret it as a new condition. Others would say was as a veto right or a right to veto, and this is where I guess some parties would see it as advantages to sort of create that fear, among Canadians in general, but more specifically with industry, that we're really putting our collective future in the hands of Indigenous peoples. This is not so, and to me, this is where it's important to remind ourselves that the declaration is an international instrument that calls on the input by all parties, and First Nations peoples, Indigenous peoples have as much obligation deriving from the principles of the declaration as Canadian governments, including the federal government, and the provinces and territories, of course.
Thank you very much, and that will bring us to the conclusion of our meeting today, and apologies to all of those in attendance for the issues that delayed us. I want to remind everyone that written submissions bear the same weight as live testimony in our council. So if there's anything that was overlooked, please make sure that the clerk gets a copy of the remarks that you wish to have made, or answer questions that may not have been asked. And with that, I'm going to say once again, thank you to all. We'll see you on Thursday. Mr. Ananda Sangri, you have a hand up.
Just a procedural question, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering between the clerk and yourself, if there's any way we can work out the process of witnesses a little bit more smoothly. I know today was very disruptive to the witnesses, and I'm sure it was difficult for the members as well. So I'm wondering if there is a mechanism, for example, the clerk giving a list of people who are in attendance who are going to be speaking, if those could be canvassed ahead of time. So if an organization is bringing more than one witness, then ensuring that there's ample time for both, or there's some understanding of what the division of time would be. I think it'll hopefully make it smoother, but also the possibility of having the witnesses join for the full 2 hours in order to avoid the transition. Just given the limited time we have, we just want to ensure that the process goes as smoothly as possible and that members have adequate time to ask questions.
All valuable points. The clerk and I will discuss that after we leave the meeting. And hopefully our next meeting on Thursday will have smoothed over some of the rough spots. And having said that, I'll ask Mr. Pawlowski to offer a motion to adjourn. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Hey, I didn't even get to say anything.